I guess the important point that Swamiji and Gurudev made was that they really wanted us to look and find out why it is we are going to be on the road to liberation from a non-existent bondage. So, in taking that look into really introspecting, as was said yesterday, we need to stand on neutral ground where we can see our experience impersonally or see it very objectively, where we neither push it away. To be as convinced as possible, it won't be the final conviction, but as convinced as possible in the very truth that these great ones are sharing with us, that it is really true that this whole world, including all of us, including the thoughts that are being harbored in our mind, are literally sourced from bliss. They're supported by bliss. And bliss is a very substratum of everything that exists, including all our thoughts that we label good as bad, or bad, painful, or pleasant. That conviction has to be there to some degree. And one way of that conviction coming, as said yesterday, is faith. And we traced it right from before creation to the nitty-gritty of our thoughts, day-to-day thoughts. Just faith, and if we have that faith, then it'll bear fruit in experience, and then faith and experience will support each other as we progress step by step, tasting that bliss. But Gurudev, he also taught integral yoga, which means not only faith, but also he taught inquiry. And he recommended we actually practice all these different paths, because at least the value I found in them myself was the more tools we have in our toolbox, the easier it is to be able to look and see. The easier it is to be convinced of this truth. And so today, just to start with, before we start to really get into the nitty-gritty of why, what is it that, as Swamiji said, we have to really look and see what is blocking us from acknowledging this ever-present truth. So I thought I would just go through a process of inquiry. And any of you who studied with Swami Brahmanandaji will know this very well. It was the way we are taught. And I must say, it's a procedure that comes from the scriptures, but not all scriptures agree. And not all great teachers agree. So Swami Brahmanandaji says, if it works for you, use it. If it doesn't, then find some other method. It doesn't matter. But this was the one that many of us found very effective. So again, we start with before creation. And in our own experience, before creation can be in two places. One is in between two thoughts, and the other is deep sleep, which both Swami Nirliptanandaji and Swami Yogasvarupanandaji referred to yesterday. Swami Brahmanandaji used to say to us, if we can really understand what is happening in deep sleep, not what we conventionally think, which is an unconscious state and rest for the body, but if we actually analyze it and find out what's actually happening in deep sleep, then he says we will understand what God is, we'll understand what the world is, and we will understand the self with a capital S. So it's not difficult. We just have to go and think about what was our deep sleep experience last night, and it's something that we're having all the time, so we can always look at it. And it's very important if or very helpful if we imagine that everybody in the planet is going into deep sleep at the same time. And so they're analyzing their experience at the same time. Because you don't compare notes with somebody who's analyzing their deep sleep with somebody who's in the waking state and taking it from the waking state perspective. So we can just imagine that. Okay, so we just come out of deep sleep. And how would we describe our experience? And it's going to be the same for all of us. Well, we know for sure we were not aware of the presence of this world. Nobody doubts that. So that means we weren't aware of our body. We weren't aware of our mind. We weren't even aware of our most intimate sense of being, or I am. Nor were we aware of their absence. So it's profoundly non-dual. Yet, none of us have any doubt that we experience deep sleep. We absolutely know we experience deep sleep. Nobody has to tell us. We don't need any scientific instruments to tell us. We know. How do we know? And Swami Yogasrupananda touched that yesterday. First of all, obviously we had to be there. Because we know we don't disappear. We had to be there. But as what? And I remember Swami Chidanandaji, he was once echoing a dialogue in the scriptures between a disciple, a guru and a disciple. And the guru was asking the disciple, by what light is everything known here? And Swamiji, they traced it from the light of the sun, when the sun is not present, to the light of the moon, when the moon is not present, to the light of the stars, when stars are not present on a monsoon night, when it's just totally clouded over, then it's the light of fire. And then if you go down into a deep cellar with a fire, with a candle, and a gust of wind blows that fire out, by what light do you that last? All those other lights can disappear. In fact, they borrow their light from the light of consciousness. So when all the other lights have gone, as Swami Yogasrupananda said, the light of awareness, we were there as that awareness, which is bliss. And we long for that state, which is a proof of its bliss, the proof of that bliss. And they call it sometimes the bliss sheet. So this is a revolutionary way of looking at our deep sleep state. But in our own experience, if we keep on looking, it's revolutionary. We have to keep on looking over and over again to convince ourselves the truth of it, because it is so contrary to the way we normally look. But if we can accept that deep sleep was full of consciousness, that radiant consciousness, but it was non-dual, so we're not aware of it. It's not a second thing. Then the question comes, what happens to this world? Because what we want to find out is, does this world really come out of awareness? Does it really come out of that bliss, as Swamiji and the great ones have said, as the scriptures have said? Can we discover the truth of that in our own experience? Because just to acknowledge consciousness is there is not sufficient proof. It's quite possible there could be a third thing blocking the perception of the world. The world is there, there could be a third thing blocking it. Or something else could be happening. And the scripture has suggested two things. Our own intellect may suggest other things. And all of them have to go to the scrutiny of the analysis of what is actually happening in our deep sleep again. And so one of the suggestions made is that perhaps there is a screen of ignorance that is veiling the perception of the world. Or maybe the world has been absorbed into seed form. So it's still independent from consciousness, but is in seed form, tiny, tiny little seed. So then we have to, or whatever one's intellect can come up with. Then we have to go back and look at our experience. Did we see a screen veiling? Did we see some kind of screen that could be veiling the world? Did we see a seed when we were in deep sleep? I think no. We were not only were we not aware of anything, we weren't even aware of the absence. So we didn't see anything. That is our experience. So then the next step is, what happened to the world? See, the only conclusion we could come to, because we know it disappeared, and we know it disappears several times during the night. Sometimes they say deep sleep is in between two dreams, the thought between two dreams, the space between two dreams. So we know that it disappeared. So the only conclusion you can come to is that the whole cosmos, whatever, as Swamiji would say, millions and billions of universes have actually dissolved into the consciousness that was deep sleep. Or you could take it a step further if you don't agree and say Turiya, but it doesn't matter. Either one. It all dissolved. And so then we can begin to entertain, wow, through our own experience, we can see that this whole world and everything in it, all the beings in it, and whatever it is composed of, sattva, rajas, and tamas, is made out of that same consciousness, same bliss. Again, it's something we have to reflect on over and over again, as we do in everything in our spiritual life, practice over and over again. But it is this way of using our intellect to analyze our own experience is a wonderful support to faith. And faith is a wonderful support of using our intellect to analyze. It's experiential because we're analyzing our own experience. They very greatly support each other. So that is one way of proof. Now the question arises, why are we not practicing this? And in addition to inquiry, and in addition to, these are very practical ways of looking at the non-dual teaching. But in addition to that, we can come to the same place through devotion, the same place of peace, the same place of ease, where we can also see clearly. And I'd like to share a few things that have been very powerful for many of us. And they are devotional talks. Swami Chidanandaji, he very easily moved, from the highest Vedanta to devotion, to meditation. Very easily he moved from these different teachings. And the first teaching I would like to share with you actually comes from the very first talk, from the very first book that we published, of Swamiji's morning talks. It was from Ponder These Truths, and the talk is called You Are Unique in the Eyes of God. And Swamiji gave that talk during Gurudev's centenary in 1987. And when he gave that talk, the transmission of love that came from Swamiji was absolutely tangible. And when you read that talk, it is tangible. And I hadn't read it for many years, but when the idea came into my mind to speak about it, I read it again, and I felt the same love being transmitted from this beautiful talk. And it's dualistic, it's devotional. And Swamiji said, as the title says, all beings are unique in the eyes of God. All beings are precious in the eyes of God. Everyone has a role to play. No one is useless. No one is dispensable. In the light of God and in the light of all those who have the vision of God. So when you're in their presence, when you're in the presence of God, when you're in the presence of those who do not have a worldly vision but have the vision of God, know for sure you are totally accepted. Totally accepted. Totally accepted. And he says, when you can let this into your heart, you'll be at ease. You'll be at peace. There's no more worry about looking at, no worry about seeing what's there. Because no matter what's there, you're totally at peace. Jesus said, come unto me, all those who are weary, and I will give you rest. He says, come unto me. Come as you are. I'm not looking for a perfect person. And then he stepped up a little higher. He says, you'll be at peace. You'll be at ease. And then he says, you are that peace. And your part to play is to spread that peace everywhere. And then there was 2 other talks just recently shared with a group of friends, so they will for sure remember this. One talk is called Responding to the Call of God. The other one is called A Faith That Sustains. It comes from this book here, A Call to Liberation. And one of the points that Swamiji made in responding to the call of God, not here, but he has said, once we've received the call, know absolutely for sure he's never going to let go of us. No matter how far we may have gone astray. But he says grace can come in many different forms to bring us to our source, to bring us to the God within. Both bitter and sweet experiences. Sometimes grace can come in absolutely agonizing experiences. And then Swamiji says, but never with dire intent, but only his love to bring us unto him, to bring us to the very source of our being. And in the other talk, when he was talking about a faith that sustains, it is a faith in that. It is a faith that no matter what difficulties we may be encountering, whatever agonizing experiences we may be going through, whatever difficulties or agonizing experiences our loved ones are going through, because actually everybody is on that route to God. No, it is coming from the love of God. And if we have that faith, then these experiences, if we know it's coming from love, and it is because it's bringing us closer to the Spirit, then what we again label as suffering, what we label as pain can be transformed immediately, recognizing into that love of God. And there was one other point I wanted to share. This also I shared with a group of friends. It was shared with me. It was actually a video of a near-death experience. And in that experience, this woman was, the reason I shared it with a few friends is because it echoed so much of the teachings I've just shared with you. And the dualistic, devotional. And one of the revelations, because this lady had many, many revelations in this near-death experience, one of them was the perfection of the whole cosmos, the absolute perfection of the cosmos and everything in it when it's seen from its totality. And this is something that Swami Chidanandaji also said. He said, if we choose to see things impersonally, we see this whole universe, this whole world as a grand and glorious expression of the design. He even said, we are an expression of that unchangeable perfection, imperishable bliss. Swami Brahmanandaji said, all religions say that the reality or God before creation, prior to creation, is perfection itself. Can a perfect God, perfect reality, create something imperfect? He says, not possible, but we don't connect the dots. And so she said the perfection, the only thing is, it cannot be really understood through the mind and intellect. And many of us, I'm sure, have had a glimpse of the perfection of all things. We've had a glimpse that everything here is an expression of that love. And we've had that glimpse, or some similar glimpse. What we know is it cannot be understood by the mind. It cannot be understood by the intellect. And the beauty is it doesn't have to be. We just have to have faith in that experience. Faith in the words of our great teachers. And that will be enough. And so these things are fairly simple. Faith in the teachings, faith in our own experience, and the practice, if that faith is there, it's a practice of, as Swamiji says, of affirmation of this truth. When we're being challenged to the core, and we think we are the worst thing that walked this planet. Faith in what Swamiji said. Faith that we are all precious in the eyes of God. Don't allow avidyamaya to tell us anything different. So that faith. So it's fairly simple. Faith to look and see, and not to worry about the uncomplimentary things that we may be shown when we ask the question. As Swamiji says, we have to find out why we're not acknowledging this ever-present truth. When bliss alone exists, how can there be sorrow? So this is how I thought to end this talk, is let us take a look. And as I said in the orientation gathering that we had, once this idea for this theme came to mind, when I regularly read Swamiji's books, everything I read seemed to be an answer to this question. And so I'll share with you a few things. The ones I share, we'll start off with one. They all the scriptures say one of the most fundamental requirements for liberation, for God realization, is having an intense desire for liberation, having a intense desire for God realization. I think we've all heard that. Swami Krishnanandaji, he was even so, I'm not saying bold to say, he said, if you really wanted God, you would have him in this moment. Certainly the teachers, they do try to challenge us sometimes to really wake us up. So when we look, we probably say, I'm not there. But a much more manageable way of saying the same thing that is within our power and much more, I guess, understandable, and as I say, manageable. Actually, the word I'm going to use is also based on 3 talks that Swamiji gave in Seek the Beyond. And there was a series, and they were called Commitment. So the first question we can ask ourselves is, because commitment is something we all know, and we all know the power of commitment in our secular life. We know if we are really committed to something, by hook or by crook, we're going to get there. It doesn't matter what the difficulties are. We're going to plunge ahead because we've made a commitment, hopefully for a good thing, not a bad thing. But Swamiji points that out also. The commitment he wants us to have the commitment to the highest. But how committed are we to saying, when the mind is saying something contrary to the truth, that God is even in all the thoughts that we are having, because that's where we have the most difficulty, even in the things that we don't like. How committed are we to affirming, even there is God? Commitment. How committed are we to letting go of the contrary, all those thoughts and feelings, not into getting into a fight with them, just not giving them attention, just not giving them credence? How committed are we to that? That commitment can form an umbrella over everything else that we can actually look at. So, just back, when bliss alone is, why is there sorrow? Now, one of the most fundamental things is what I mentioned yesterday when we talked about the descent of consciousness, and we got down to what Avidyamaya will tell us where we're going to get our happiness from, where we're going to get our satisfaction from, our meaning in life from. And remember, it was said one of the most difficult things to overcome, including for anybody who's renunciate, they have to be alert to this, to the very last breath, is wanting to be someone, wanting to stand out. And I'll share with you a little story about this. So, wanting to stand out, wanting to be someone. So you can imagine the most difficult thing for that principle called ego that wants, it's an impersonal, remember how impersonal this is. And we are looking at this from an impersonal point of view. So, that impersonal principle of ego that wants to stand out, you can imagine one of the greatest punishments for that, the greatest way of flattening that, is to ignore it. So, that was the way my beloved Guru treated this ego for many, many years. But it didn't see it impersonally for many, many years. It was a very hurt little ego. Thought it's not worthy and all of that. So it was a very hurt little ego. Then gradually, it started to see things more impersonally. One time, so you're going back and forth. One time, the way that Swamiji ignored was so potent. My father was there, Swami Amritarupananda, he was there, even he was embarrassed. And so, anyways, I went back to my room, and all of a sudden it came to me, a talk that Swamiji gave, and I realized Swamiji is neither trying to make me feel bad about myself or unworthy, nor is he trying to make me feel good about myself. He's trying to get rid of me altogether. And in this talk I'm referring to, he had said the only job of a guru is to get rid of that which is blocking the truth. And the only thing that's blocking the truth is the darkness of the ego principle. That's what Swami Yogaswarupananda, when he defined guru, it's the removal of darkness. So that talk had come into my mind. So, there was great peace with that. There was openness, there was kind of a free feeling in that. So, from that place of, just feeling at peace and the feeling of freedom there, the question arose, are you willing to be treated as ordinary, as no different from anyone else? nothing special. And totally before thought, a big no came. So the rawness, the whole rawness of the ego principle that wants to be someone was revealed. Completely raw, completely an impersonal force, but it was brought to light. And as when Gurudev says, bare insult, bare injury, highest sadhana, because it's getting right to that principle there. So that is one of the things when we ask the question, what is it? What is it that is interfering with us recognizing the bliss that is always there? Now, given the fact that it wants to remain alive, that ego principle, impersonal, ego principle wants to really remain alive, it has its own methods. And one of the methods is fear. And you may all know, and it may have been your experience also in meditation. Many people have said, in meditation, they'll go so far and then they come to a place, it seems like a cliff or an abyss, and they're filled with fear and they don't want to go any further, and they retreat. So there's that fear. And I haven't experienced that, but I experienced it in another form. When I took sannyas in 1996, I had actually asked for it 2 times before, so this was the 3rd time asking. And I wrote a letter to Swamiji because he wasn't in the ashram at the time. He was actually on tour, and he wasn't to return for 1 month. But while it was in my mind and fresh, I wrote the letter to him, and everything sannyas meant to me. Then when he returned to the ashram, and he always came to night satsang, I went to my room to pick up the letter, to take it to Swamiji. But when I picked up the letter, I experienced a fear that I had never experienced in my life before. And I went, what is this? And, all the thoughts contrary to wanting to take sannyas came into the mind. And it was only when a counter thought, a memory of what a teacher had once said, I don't care what you think, I don't care what you do. I don't care what you think, I don't care what you feel, it's what you do. That some strength came up the backbone, and I proceeded to take the letter to Swamiji and give it to him. And then a few days later, Swamiji called me down to Guru Nivas. Most of you may have hopefully gone down to Guru Nivas and gone up to the stairs and sat in his room to meditate. So he'd called me down to Guru Nivas, and we were walking up the stairs together, but he was ahead of me. And he turned back and he says, you have understood what sannyas means. And then I understood where the fear was coming from. Because in that letter, one of the things I said was, I was committed to ego death. And that letter was being turned over to the one being who was committed to the death of the darkness in all his disciples. So that's where that fear. Now, back to the fear that people can experience. I asked Swamiji about that once. And he says people have come to him with that same difficulty. And he says, I tell them it is the most wonderful thing that can ever happen to you. So the point is, again, it is one of the tricks, one of the tools of that ego principle, which, you see, when we see that, we can then, if we want liberation, we can safely ignore it, safely let it be, and keep going. But fear is a very tough one, because we interpret it as meaning the direction we're going is wrong. There's something wrong, rather than it is simply a tool of the ego principle to mess up the works. But it can also come in other forms. Anxiety, of course. But it can come in, like Swamiji said, I thought I might read, because this is a place where he says, each one has to find out for oneself, why one refuses to acknowledge the ever-present truth, why one refuses to see. Then alone we could correct the defective vision. Then he said, this is what's interesting, sometimes it is unwillingness. Sometimes it may be due to the consequences that would arise out of such a perception. It may be uncomfortable. It may be inconvenient. Now, what I took that to mean is, we all have our identity, and we are all assessing ourselves in relationship to others, of being superior to others. We may be in a privileged position. It may be inconvenient or uncomfortable to give up that privileged position. Or we may be even a victim, which is energizing our life. We may not want to give that up either, because both have to be given up. But in not such an uncomplimentary way, there may be a fear, and I've heard this come out on a number of occasions. If everything is an expression of that love, if everything is that, I won't know how to be. I won't know how to act. How will I choose? I even recently heard a dialogue, someone who had experienced that everything was coming from this love of God. How do I choose then, if everything is that love? And also I remember once when we were with Swami Brahmanandaji in Delhi, this many, many years ago, and because we were with Swami Brahmanandaji, who's, for those who are new here, he was a hidden saint in our ashram who taught Advaita Vedanta only. And so we were with him, and he was considered, as I say, a hidden saint. So when we were with him, everybody was inviting us out because they all wanted him there. And so anyhow, one of the places we went was a home of a doctor. And she had a clinic, and maybe she had also a private hospital, I can't remember now. But you can imagine if you're a doctor, your support staff, they have to be alert. They cannot make mistakes. If they make mistakes, if they're careless, it can be life-threatening. So naturally, she would scold them if they weren't paying attention and they were making mistakes. So she said to Swami Brahmanandaji, when hearing this great teaching, everything is that, everyone's that, all beings are that. But she translated it into the personal God. She says, how can I be scolding Lord Krishna? And Swamiji says, you see, you've misunderstood the truth. You've misunderstood the truth. And it is not so difficult to answer it, but it is a problem that can arise. See, these things are often unconscious. Even that, you see, the raw wanting to be somebody, that raw fear is most of the time unconscious to us. So this also, how will I know how to act if everything is the same thing? So I'll just share a number of things. Swami Brahmananda used to give an anecdote. He used to give an analogy, at least. I don't know if it was his or whether he got it from the scriptures, but he says, look, because everything is God, obviously the cows are God, the dogs are God, everything is God. He says, are you going to invite a cow in for tea? And he says, no. You're going to give what the cow likes, which is grass. So you're going to do what's appropriate. This experience of the truth is an inner vision. As Swamiji says as well, that reality beyond time and space, no problem. When it manifests as this world, it does manifest as sattva, rajas, and tamas. We must discriminate. So we must discriminate between a cow and a human being, a cow and a guest coming to our room, and do what's appropriate, without forgetting everything is Brahman. So even that discrimination is also that. And the choice to give it what's appropriate is also that. So there is no conflict of doing what is appropriate, but we just have to remember it's also that, and remembering everything is Brahman. And you'll remember when we traced the descent of consciousness from the absolute to the sense I am. In the sense I am, we mentioned there's clear seeing. We see without distortion. And from that, wisdom comes. So, in fact, we may not know until the time we need to know, because we want to know everything ahead of time, but we may not know till the time we need to know, but clear seeing results in wisdom. So there is no danger, and I will also give an example of a good friend from Canada. She was before she was dedicating her life fully to the spiritual life, she's now retired, but she was a judge in the court of law. And, you've got the hands of people, many people. You've got the lives of many people in your hand. I mean, it's a very serious job, just like a doctor, And because whatever you're ruling and harming others. So it's a very weighty thing, I mean, it's no joke. Most of the time, a ruling would be fairly clear according to the law. But she told me once that when she didn't know, she wasn't sure what she should do, what the answer was, she allowed herself to become very, very quiet. She allowed herself so that her attention was not lost where the conflict is. Her attention was able to sink. She may not have called it this, but it was able to sink where the place where wisdom springs from. And she said when she allowed herself to become very, very quiet, and she would keep quiet, then the answer would come. And it was always correct. And she rarely, I think she never had a judgment overruled. So that's a very practical example to, that fear that may be lurking there, I won't know how to be. It means we can trust. We can trust in the source and support and substratum of our being. These things don't have to unconsciously interfere. And then the last one I thought to share with you is also, yesterday when I was reading that passage from Swamiji's book, Seek the Beyond, and Swamiji lastly said, it wasn't from Seek the Beyond, it was another one. When he was presenting the paradox itself, and he was saying that liberation from bondage was a misnomer for Brahman. All you need to do is, really need to do is acknowledge the ever-present truth of who you are, and just dismiss or get rid of those thoughts and feelings that are contrary. And then he finally said, really the effort is to get rid of indolence, to get rid of tamas, to get rid of mental indifference. So this is another very key point, because this relates to how we are just in our ordinary lives. People often say, look, everything is okay in my meditation room, or when I'm by myself. I can see the truth, everything is calm. That's a very common experience for all of us. But the moment we come into contact with our family, when we come into contact with our office or wherever our work atmosphere is, or we're listening to the news, whatever it is, then automatically the judgments come. Automatically we can see the complaining comes. We just have to watch our discourse. I mean, how often are we remembering the highest truth? We're right down there as complaining ourselves, complaining with everybody else. We know this experience very well. And this is where commitment really plays a role. And, Dr. Dominique, who you'll hear tonight, we were having a Skype call one day. And she said to me, you know, I've taken a vow that I am not going to add to the polarization that we see in the world, the conflict we see in this world. And when she said that, I said, well, I have to take the same vow, because I know very well how much in my normal discourse you get right back down to complaining. And the power of that vow is, the complaints may still be in the mind. Of course, if we don't give expression, there's no problem. They're also impersonal. It's the giving expression to them. Not only are we reinforcing the untruth and the sorrow in our own mind, but we are spreading it. We're concurring with the world on that. So that commitment to be awake, a commitment not to be mentally indifferent to that is very powerful. And I've noticed now, okay, the judgment starts to flow out. Matter when we see, as long as we see it and make the correction. And then, but the more we're committed to it, the faster we'll actually catch it. Maybe we'll catch it before it even comes out of us. And maybe we'll catch it when it's already in our mind. And it becomes a stepping stone to our liberation. So these are the things, when Swamiji says, you know, how can there be sorrow? How can there be sorrow when bliss alone is? We can consider and bring to light those things that may be unconscious. And again, it's so important to remember how impersonal they are, so that we have no fear to look. That even the impulse to look, the will to look, is also that. It's also impersonal. It's also a movement of grace in us, of the Divine Mother in us. And when we start to see these things clearly, just one more thing. The very last talk in Seek the Beyond, actually it's not the last talk, it was supposed to be the last talk, and then we added one more. Swamiji was asking the same question. It was Diwali, and Swamiji said, he asked the question, Diwali is a time of rejoicing in India. When everybody's sharing gifts and so forth. It's a little bit like our Christmas in the West. Everybody's sharing gifts, and it's a time of rejoicing, fireworks and all this. So Swamiji says, why are we not rejoicing always? He says we should find out, get to the bottom of it. But it wasn't so confrontational, because he was in a good mood. I guess it was around Diwali. And anyways, he told a Zen story to try and answer this question for us. He said, the story was, I'm really condensing it, Swamiji really embellished this story, but a baby goose went into a bottle that had some pickles in it, went to a barn and went into a bottle with pickles in it. And that baby goose, when it went into the bottle with pickles, it was nibbling on the pickles and liked it. But when it wanted to go out of the bottle, it couldn't go in reverse gear and it couldn't turn around. So there must have been enough pickles there for it to grow up. So it grew up in the bottle to a big size. Okay, then it definitely couldn't get out of the bottle. Then the Zen master says to the student, get the goose out of the bottle without harming the goose and without breaking the bottle. So Swamiji says the disciple was going crazy trying to figure out how you do the impossible. And it got to the point where he was about to collapse. And just at the point where the disciple was about to collapse, the master clapped his hands and kept clapping the hands and saying, the goose is out of the bottle, the goose is out of the bottle. So Swamiji said, you see, he who put him into the bottle had to get him out of the bottle. So that tells us something. He who's created all this has to get out of it. In other words, it is all up to that. We can totally surrender and be at ease. And Swamiji said, you know, what was the agony of that disciple. He was trying to get it through his intellect. He was trying to go to the place where the intellect, they say that the mind and the intellect speech, they go there and they turn back baffled. They turn back baffled. We have to, as he said, take the leap. Take the leap. But what it really means is we can be at ease, we can be at peace. That which has called us, through hook or by crook, through sweet experiences, through agonizing experiences, is going to bring us to that bliss. And if we know that, if we have enough faith in that, then whatever that suffering can be is going to be transformed. So I'll end with that talk of Swami Hari Om Tat Sat.